What's going on YouTube? It's Brezzy43 coming at you here again, coming off of a wonderfully relaxing and nice weekend. Spent some time with my girlfriend over the holiday. It was really nice. But I'm ready to, so I took a couple of days off from YouTube here, but I'm ready for the next installment of our video. I'm excited about this part because this is the part of Pokemon that I personally enjoy very much. This is what I'm going to be referring to this episode as optimizing EVs. So optimization is what a lot of players really enjoy about Pokemon. It allows you to basically, just to recap here quick what we've talked about so far to get to this point. We've talked about natures, IVs, and EVs, which are all the components, all the stat manipulations that actually make up a competitive Pokemon, or make up a Pokemon in general, not necessarily competitive Pokemon. Nature is an attribute of a Pokemon that increases one stat by 10% and decreases the other, or another one by 10%. IVs are stat boosts given to Pokemon numerically between 0 and 31 at birth or at encounter with the Pokemon. At level 50, it can increase the stat by a maximum of 15 points. That's if it's a 31 IV. And then EVs, every Pokemon has 508 EVs to distribute as the trainer chooses into stats at level 50. The first 4 points you put into a stat will increase that respective stat by 1, and then from there it requires 8 EVs to increase the stat by 1, with a maximum of 252 into a single stat. So from here, now that we've got this base here, we're going to start talking about ways that you can distribute your stats for your Pokemon in an optimal way to do what a lot of players, you'll hear it often referred to as EVing for something. So what that means essentially is that you, the trainer, have identified something that you want your Pokemon to do, and your EVs reflect that. So some examples of what you might hear is I EV'd this Pokemon to outspeed this Pokemon, or I EV'd for Tyranitar Rock Slide. That means that I EV'd my Pokemon to live Tyranitar Rock Slide. Obviously, that changes the equation if they land a critical hit. That's completely beside. You don't factor in critical hits when you do your EVs. You just care about the base damage of the Pokemon. So to talk more about this, I'm going to be using Pokemon Showdown, and I'm also going to be using the Pokemon damage calculator that we briefly touched on in the previous video. So here you have your Pokemon Showdown. We're going to go into a new team. This was the previous team we were looking at, and we are going to start again with Cinderace. So if we were looking for to build a competitive Cinderace, what we talked about previously was that Cinderace is a Pokemon that is going to be a fast offensive, what's referred to as a sweeper. This is a Pokemon that's going to be on your team to most likely be one of the Dynamax candidates and look to pick up knockouts as often as possible, playing to these good stats that it has of its speed and attack. So if you were to look at the common Cinderace spread, it would be something like this, and like this, with a jolly nature. Okay? So one of the things I want to talk about, specifically, it's an observation that I noticed and then confirmed with my own testing around in Showdown. I can't speak to whether or not this stays true at level 100. However, at level 50, your Pokemon, you can only invest, or you have to invest in an odd number of stats in order to not waste EVs. And I suspect this has to do with the way, because you have to invest 4 stats into 4 EVs into a stat to get the initial boost, and then 8 from there to get subsequent boosts. The math works out where if you try to invest in an even number of stats, you end up wasting 4 EVs. So let me give you an example. Let's say I wanted my Cinderace to stay max speed, but let's say I wanted, in exchange for all of this offense, maybe instead I dropped this down to 160 because this KOs something specific. Let's say we were running Pyro Ball, and maybe Pyro Ball with this much attack guarantees to KO Rillaboom, for example. Rillaboom being the grass starter from this game. Okay, so maybe we've identified with our calculator that Pyro. This is a hypothetical hypothetical response here. But let's say Pyro Ball, or hypothetical situation, excuse me. Let's say Pyro Ball, we knew that it was, we EV'd 188 EVs. We found out always KOs Rillaboom regardless of its spread. So what do we want to do with these remaining 64? Let's say, based on the math that we know, if we were to invest all 64 in defense, maybe we live a specific rock move from a Pokemon or a water move from a Pokemon or whatever the case is, right? If I go to try to put all 64 into defense, you're going to see something really interesting that Showdown's going to catch for us. Showdown's really nice for this. The game itself in Pokemon Sword and Shield will not catch this for you. But if you take a look, it's going to drop me back down to 60. It won't let me put 64 in unless I manually do it. Now, why? Why won't it let me? Well, if you take a look, if we have 64 EVs in, we get a stat of 103. But we also get that same 103 stat at 60. So this is where I talked about how after the initial boost, after the initial 4 EVs to increase the stat by 1, it takes 8 from there. This would be like putting in 4 of the 8. So you're not going to get any more out of this. It's going to stay the same stat. So Showdown's like, well, this is a waste. Don't do this. So from here, we could potentially put the value point here. But we have to invest in an odd number of stats. So this is actually the only place that we could logically put it. Technically, we could put it in the special attack stat, but we don't. You wouldn't normally want to do that. Alternatively, you could also do this, and that would work because you're investing in 3 stats still. But this is this like I said, we were talking about a specific example about investing in defense. So the math itself won't let you invest into an even number of EVs, specifically 4, because you can, like, if you tried to just invest in 2, you'd waste 4 as well. So you can't invest in 4 EVs or 4 stats without wasting at minimum 4 EVs. You could potentially waste more if you wanted to, but you, like, if I just did this, for example, I'd be wasting up to 60. But the Showdown is going to tell you whenever you try to do this, like, hey, this is not efficient. This is not good. This is a waste of 4 EVs. Put this somewhere else. So we put it here, right? This is something that I kind of noticed and then went and tested myself and was like, oh, this is interesting. So it must be mathematically that way. The reason how I noticed this actually was with the Pokemon Reuniclus. So your Reuniclus, for those of you that don't know, is a psychic type Pokemon that is incredibly slow, with a very high special attack stat and a very high HP stat. So one of the things that I did was, in order to this Pokemon is, I don't want to get too much into the competitive actual gameplay yet, but one of the 2 primary forms of speed control in a game is, or what's referred to as speed control, is a move called Trick Room. Trick Room is a move that actually Reuniclus learns. For 5 turns, turn order is reversed. So essentially, for 5 turns, the slower Pokemon move before faster Pokemon. So that's the essential gameplay of Trick Room, right? So Reuniclus is a Pokemon, one of the very few examples of a Pokemon that you'd want to be as slow as possible. So you'd have a 0 IV, and you would probably run a minus speed nature and a plus special attack nature, right? So this was the Pokemon I was EVing at the time, and I knew that I wanted to be maximum offense. Excuse me. But from here, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with 256. I knew that I wanted it to be bulky because obviously, if I'm trying for it to be really slow, I don't want to put any EVs into speed. And obviously, putting EVs into attack is a waste given that Reuniclus has such a high special attack stat. So my initial response was to do something like this. But if you look, it catches you. It's like it would actually be closer to something like this, right? The game, the client catches you and it's like, whoa, this is not efficient. You shouldn't do this. This is going to waste you 4 EVs. Now, technically, I could just put the 4 EVs here, which some people do. It's not necessarily, it's a strategic component. Like, for Reuniclus, this is not great, but for other Pokemon, if Reuniclus was a really common Pokemon in the metagame, then this could be potentially strategic to me to know that I outspeed other Reuniclus inside Trick Room by exactly 1 point rather than speed tie them. So that's something that but like normally you wouldn't want to do this. So instead you would do something like this, right? This would give you 3 stats, which is an odd number, and it would not waste any EVs, right? And you would shore up this defense because it's lower of the two. So this is where I first noticed it. So remember, you have to, in order to not waste EVs and to be as efficient as possible, you need to invest in an odd number of stats. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to touch on. The second thing is what's referred to as bumps. So I like to call them nature bumps or nature jumps, or I've heard them referred to as many different things. But let's go back to Cinderace, for example, and let's get rid of all these quick. Let's say that we wanted to we wanted to run him Jolly, plus speed minus special attack for his nature. So this is true for any excuse me. Sorry about that. This is true for any Pokemon, specifically referring to their nature boosted stat, right? So if you take a look, for Cinderace, it's interesting because it actually happens right away. But if you look, the first 4 points we put into Cinderace actually jumps him from 152 to 154. This has to do with the 10% increase in the way that Pokemon rounds. Pokemon doesn't actually round, they truncate. So for example, 10% of 15.5 is just 15 for Pokemon. It doesn't round it up. Even if it's like 15.9, it's still going to cut that 9 off and it's going to just stay at 15. So because of the truncation and the 10%, that's my theory at least as to why it does this. I haven't actually explored this mathematically yet. But if you take a look, this happens at every 80 once it initially happens. It's different for every Pokemon depending on where it is, but from when it happens, it happens again every 80 EVs. So this should happen again at 84, which if we take a look, increases by 1 every 8, every 8, every 8, every 8, every 8, and then take a look. It jumps from 163 to 165 at 84. Should happen again at 164, right? So if we do this again, 1.1.169, 170, 171, 172, 173, 174, then it jumps to 176. This is what's referred to as what I said, nature bumps. It'll happen if we change it again too. If we like, let's say we went plus attack instead. Let's take a look. 1, 2, 3, 4. There it is. It happened at 28 this time. 152 to 154. So now it should happen again at 108, right? Plus 80. 157, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 65. Boom. There's the jump. So this happens at every single for every single Pokemon given the nature boosted stat. Why does this matter? Well, for Cinderace in particular, it doesn't really matter because Cinderace is almost always going to be run the same way, which is something like this. But let's say you had a Pokemon that you were investing into its stats, and you didn't exactly know what to EV for after you hit the target. So a really good example of this is Rotom Heat. Rotom Heat's a really popular Pokemon in the metagame right now, and it fulfills a lot of different roles for teams. But one of the things that is so unique about Rotom Spread is this is almost true for everybody. Almost everybody does this. It's either 252 or 244. Almost everybody runs this. It just depends on what item you give Rotom. We'll get to that here in a minute. But after this, you have 256 EVs to hit, and most people will run a modest nature. Not everybody, but most people. Modest or timid, right? Let's say for the sake of the argument, I wanted to hit 113. This 113 stat was something that me and my friend Ben, who I team build with a lot, this is something that we had initially aimed for because, at the time that we built this, there was a lot of base 60 speed water types, specifically Lapras and Primarina, that if you take a look, timid max speed is 123. Oops, sorry, I meant to say modest. Modest max speed is 112, which Rotom out the 52 EVs outspeeds by exactly 1. This was a spread that we were using specifically to beat modest max speed Lapras and then all Primarina, because most people weren't running max speed Primarina, but some people were running max speed Lapras, right? So Rotom, once you get these 52 EVs in, let's say you don't know what, you know that you want to spread the rest out in these last 3 stats, but you don't really know how. You can actually aim for these jumps as a decent point to hit, rather than if you don't know what you want to EV for damage wise. Like most of the time, Rotom's going to be run with a fire move, an electric move, usually protect, and then some other move. Will-O-Wisp is a good one. Nasty Plot for offensive pressure. Both good options, but let's just leave these three moves for now, right? Let's say you don't really have anything in particular that you want to be killing with Overheat or Thunderbolt. This is something you can actually aim for those nature bumps as a good point to stop at. So like, let's see what happens for Rotom. So 137, 138, 139, 40, 41, 43. So it happens here. So it should happen again at 116. Yep. So 152 to 154. And then it should happen again at 196. So if you were to go up to 196, you would get a jump from 163 to 165. That's the reason why this is good to just get this extra jump is because look at if we were to stop here and we were to go something like this, if we just take 4 points out of both of these, we get effectively a double stat increase here to go from 163 to 165. That's a good place to stop, and then you can still get your 1 value point in both bulk. This is an example of like what I would say is like you've got your Rotom specifically designed to beat something, right? You've got your 113 speed, which we talked about being faster than Modest Lapras. So you're going to put the rest into special attack, but you're not quite sure how much. This is a good jump point to aim for because once you hit this this is like extra bang for your buck. You get 162 to 165. The remaining 8 EVs can just go 4 into each of the defenses, and then you still have your max HP, right? This is a pretty good play. This is actually a Rotom spread that I've run multiple times. It was usually on the water Rotom instead of the heat Rotom, but that's okay. This is a good Rotom. I would quote unquote call this a good Rotom spread. This is where you this is something that you had a specific speed stat in mind. You wanted to get max HP because Rotom wants to shore up its weakness, and then the rest you weren't quite sure what to aim for, so you aim for the nature bump. Right? Pretty reasonable. Another good example of this. Let me think for a second. I think we did this with Landorus too. Let me pull up Landorus quick. Landorus T. So our Landorus was Choice Scarf, which we knew that max speed Landorus with Choice Scarf hits 143, which with the Choice Scarf 1.5 times boost, you actually outspeed Dragapult, which is was the fastest Pokemon at the time. Now Regieleki's the fastest Pokemon, but Dragapult was if you take a look at Dragapult here, Dragapult is almost always run, if it's offensive, it's run Jolly max speed, and it hits 213, and if you take 143, and you times it by 1.5, you get 214, and remember it truncates, so 214 on the dot, which is exactly 1 point faster than Dragapult. So we didn't need to invest any more there, so we went with an Adamant Nature, and I think we just hit the jump. Let me just confirm quick. So the jump happens right here, 85 to 87. So you add 80 to that, and you get 116. Yep, jumps from 108 or 196 to 198 at 116, and then it happens again at 196. And we just stopped at 196. This gives us that extra jump from 207 to 209, and then it lets us put the remaining 60 into bulk. And I think we spread it out pretty evenly. We did something like this. We did something like, nope, not 30. 30 is not a number you can do. 32 maybe, and then 24. Yeah, this was a Landorus spread that we ran, and then we chose our moves, right? But this was like we aimed for the jump here on Landorus because this doesn't change the math at all. It still happens at that point. Oh, but I wasted 4 EVs. What did I waste for? There we go. I wasted it there. Okay. So this is a good Landorus spread, quote unquote good, meaning like I didn't waste any EVs. I had a specific speed stat I was aiming for with Choice Scarf. 196 gets me my jump from 207 to 209, which is in my best interest to aim for because I know that I want to be offensive Landorus, but I don't know how much offense I want. And it still gave me 60 EVs to spread out in the defenses, which is great. Okay, so that's nature jumps. That's a reasonable place to stop on that for now. Next, I want to talk about, there is one more thing on the nature jumps that I want to touch on as well. It specifically happened to me with Dusclops. I had a Dusclops that Dusclops is a Trick Room setter for a lot of teams that a lot of people will run 0 speed and then a minus special attack nature or minus speed nature with and plus 1 of the defenses, right? And it's almost always max HP because again it's its weakest stat, and this is a bulky Pokemon that we want to be EVing this Pokemon to take hits. So max HP just kind of makes sense. So I think I had a sassy Dusclops that I had left over from a previous team. And I didn't have the ability to change the nature at the time. I didn't have enough BP in the game to buy a sassy mint and change the nature. So I was just going to re-EV the Pokemon. And I wanted to hit 180 in stat for some specific calculation. I don't remember what it was. But if we hit 180 in the defense, and we put the remaining into SPDF, you get a stat spread like this, right? Pretty fine, like pretty reasonable. You've got your good spread here. You've got what you're looking to EV for. This is fine, right? This is good. Okay. Well, actually, I noticed something really interesting on another Dusclops that I had encountered after this point. That was relaxed nature. So it was minus plus in defense. And if you take a look, let's say you actually aimed for that 180 mark again to live whatever specific calculation you had, and you dumped the remaining 148 into SPDF, you actually gained an extra point of SPDF with the defense boosting nature. You still have 147 HP, you still have 180 defense, but you're hitting 169 SPDF rather than 168. And that's most likely, I think, based on the jumps that happen for Dusclops in the defense boosted nature. You get an extra EV for the jump, and so therefore you get an extra point to put into SPDF where you didn't get it here because instead of defense being the nature boosted stat, it's SPDF, right? So this was something I stumbled into accidentally, and it started making me think more about nature bumps, and now I check that a lot on my Pokemon. So it isn't always in your best interest to have the stat that you increase the most with EVs be nature boosted. That isn't always the case. But in this specific one for Dusclops, it helped me gain an extra point of defense, which was valuable, obviously. Okay. So we've talked about nature bumps. They happen in the nature boosted stat, and they give essentially 2 stat boosts for 1 single EV's worth of stat, right? It only happens in the nature boosted stat, and we talked about the optimization and how it should look when you EV into odd number of stats. You can't EV into an even number. I want to start talking now about some different things you can do with your EVs for specific stats. Most of this only applies to HP because HP is really... There's a lot of things that happen in an actual Pokemon battle that influence a Pokemon, like weather or like terrain or items that you want to that if you have the option to EV for, you should EV for them. So let's start talking about HP. So HP is a really interesting it's often what people will put their EVs into if they are looking to add bulk to their Pokemon, but they're not exactly sure where. If you EV into HP, you're going to increase both of your defenses by a certain amount, but you're not going to increase... Like, let's say, for example, I ran something like this, minus, plus, and then let's say I hit a specific number here, right? Let's say it was like this, and then... And I could put all the rest of it into here if I wanted, but I'm not actually going to help my defense as much as I would if by increasing it more, right? So this 252 in HP is going to give me better bulk all around, but it's not going to give me as good of defensive bulk if I went like this, right? That's kind of just self-explanatory. You guys get that. Same with special defense if I just did this, right? So oftentimes you'll see people do this with remaining EVs once they hit a certain threshold that they want. There's a bit more up-to-date example. This is Tapu Fini, right? Tapu Fini is an interesting Pokemon because it provides a really supportive ability with Misty Surge, but oftentimes what you'll see people do if they're going to run an offensive Finny is they'll run Choice Specs, which gives the holder a plus 1.5 times damage boost. However, it can only select the first move it executes until it switches out or it Dynamaxes, right? So if you were to run modest Tapu Fini, minus attack plus special attack, max attack, right? Because you want to be max attack when you're trying to deal damage. What are you going to do with the remaining EVs? Well, let's say you wanted to hit a specific speed threshold. Let's say it was 115 for whatever reason. I don't know what it would be. Maybe it's 120. Let's say 120. Okay, you have 140 EVs left. You could do this. This is something that a lot of people will do just to give the overall better bulk to your Pokemon, because you're not really sure what you want to EV for. What you can actually do is is you can take out 8 points here, the last EV boost that you gave yourself. So you go from 163 to 132, but you can put an extra 4 into both of these stats, which will give it a free boost. So you're essentially trading 1 stat point of HP for 1 point in both defense and special defense, because, like I said, at level 50, it only takes 4 EVs to get you your first initial increase in stat. And from there it would take 8. So it's actually more beneficial, instead of being 163 here, to drop down to 132 and put 4 into both of these. This still gives you good HP bulk all around, but it also complements your defenses pretty nicely. This is in an example with Tapu Fini, where Tapu Fini's defenses are already very high, and you're trying to make its HP a bit better. But it's in my personal opinion, it's directly beneficial to do this, because this spread, you just get free value points here. You get 2 points for the price of 1. Instead of having 163, you have 162, but you exchange 136 instead of 135 and 151 instead of 150, right? This is a good trade-off overall. Unless there's something specific you want that HP for, I can't think of anything offhand. This is what I would recommend doing. You saw this with if you watched one of my previous videos, we were using a modest Colossal. Colossal is a cool fire type Pokemon that we were using a G-Max form of. We were hitting it with a water move for its steam engine and doing a bunch of damage. We ran 252 modest because we wanted to be we wanted to do as much damage as possible. And then we hit a specific threshold for speed that we wanted. I believe we have 180. Which lets us outspeed, once we get our steam engine going, it lets us outspeed Chlorophyll Venusaur in the sun, which is one of the fastest things in the metagame. And these remaining 76 EVs, you could just dump them here, but you could also go down to 68 and put 1 value point into both of these stats. This is what we did with ours. And I also know that this is what Wolf Glick did with his Players Cup winning team. So this is just a nice little trick you can do to give yourself a little bit of extra bulk. You exchange 1 HP point for 1 in both defenses. Okay, pretty straightforward. Well, there's a really interesting item that also goes along with this that is really popular with offensive Pokemon, and it's the Life Orb. So Cinderace will often carry Life Orb, and if you take a look at Life Orb said holders attacks do 1.3 times damage, so all of your attacks get a 30% damage increase. However, you lose 1/10 of your max HP after the attack. So if you take a look at Cinderace's attack, 156, it's going to lose 15%, or it's going to lose 15 HP every turn, because it's 10% of 156 is 15 for Pokemon, because like we said, Pokemon truncates, it does not round. So why is that good? Why is that a good thing? Well, Life Orb actually interacts very interestingly with Dynamax. Because Dynamax is a temporary change to your Pokemon, it doesn't actually recalculate the 10% off of the Dynamax Pokemon's HP. So when you Dynamax, you double your HP. So Cinderace would essentially go to 312 HP for 3 turns rather than 156. Well, Life Orb doesn't scale, or doesn't change as well to be a percentage of Dynamax HP. So even though you have 312 HP, you're not taking 31 HP recoil from Life Orb. Instead, you're still taking the 15. So when you're Dynamax, it essentially deals 1/5 rather than 1/10, which is a big deal. A Pokemon that this happened with that I've used a lot of is Reuniclus again. Reuniclus was a specific Pokemon that we wanted to have as our Trick Room Sweeper, like I talked about. 0 speed, 0 attack, plus Spatak, minus speed. Okay, so if I was looking to EV this thing, I would want to have the majority of my EVs in Spatak, most likely max. I think we actually settled with 244, and it helped our bulk first. So I'll touch on that in a second, but it helped our bulk specifically. So Reuniclus carries the Life Orb. Reuniclus has a really interesting ability called Magic Guard, which means that this Pokemon can only be damaged by direct attacks. So things like Sandstorm and Hail and other hazards don't affect this Pokemon, including Life Orb. So you actually don't have to worry about Life Orb chip when you have Magic Guard. However, at the time we were using Overcoat, and the reason why is because of a very specific Pokemon called Amoonguss. Overcoat protects us from powder moves and damage from Sandstorm or Hail, which is similar to Magic Guard. However, Reuniclus can't be put to sleep with Sleep Powder, it can't be put to sleep with Spore from Amoonguss, and it can't be redirected. It can't have its attacks redirected with Rage Powder. Those were like... Amoonguss is like everyone's answer to Trick Room on the offensive teams, and this is a really nice like tech that we made to beat Amoonguss, right? So there's actually a neat EV trick you can do with if your Pokemon's carrying the Life Orb for certain Pokemon. It doesn't really apply to Cinderace, and I'll talk about that in a second. So, remember how I said Pokemon truncates rather than rounds? So if you take a look, if you think about Life Orb does 10%, and we know that we want to be investing in Reuniclus's bulk. Ideally, we would want to get as high of an HP investment as we could without taking additional damage from Life Orb. So what do I mean by that? So 10% of 185 is 18 for Pokemon's sake. 10% of 186, still 18. 187, still 18. 188, still 18. 189, still 18. 190, okay, now we jump to 19. So if you're looking to invest into your bulk while still what people refer to as optimizing for Life Orb, you would want your stat to end in a 9. This allows you to have the highest amount of HP possible without taking additional damage from Life Orb chip. So what you could do is you could aim for 199 and then put the rest here into, and this is why we dropped this was what it was. So we dropped 1 point here for an additional bulk to bring us to 115 even stat, right? But this 199 in HP allows us to have the most HP that we can while still taking 19 damage from Life Orb. If we had increased this to 200, we'd be taking 200 damage from, or not 200, sorry, we'd be taking 20 damage from Life Orb rather than 19. So this is just a kind of an optimization tip you can go for if you're looking to be, if you're going to be investing in bulk anyway. Like I said, it doesn't really apply to Cinderace because you generally are going to run this thing max attack, max speed. You could, in theory, do something like this, but you're sacrificing like 3 points of attack here that you probably would want to have, because it might mess with some of your calculations. But Reuniclus is not. Reuniclus still gets to have its special attack investment, and it instead you get to optimize for it. I would normally tell you that this happens a lot more often with Trick Room Pokemon, but it's actually something that I've done with a Pokemon Hydreigon. So if you look at Hydreigon is a Pokemon that has a really high special attack stat, pretty reasonable attack stat, good defenses, good HP, and pretty good speed. So you're almost always going to be running this thing timid max speed, but most people do this. However, if you look, we're already at 168, so you could, in theory, drop this down to 244 and just go ahead and grab that extra point, because if you're going to run this thing Life Orb, this would technically be Life Orb optimal, and you would get the I don't know why I keep quoting optimal. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to like reiterate what I'm saying here, but the air quotes don't really make a lot of sense. So I get the 169 stat, which again, lets me take 16 from Life Orb rather than 17, and I only sacrificed one special attack point to get that optimization, right? So that's just something you can do for Life Orb. Again, it won't always apply to all Life Orb users because a lot of them are going to be like Cinderace. Some other examples are like if we take a look at Dragapult. Dragapult will if it's offensive, will most often be carrying the Life Orb, and will also be doing something like this. So you can't really optimize for the Life Orb chip, because if you do, you're sacrificing a lot more in your. You're sacrificing a lot more. You're actually sacrificing 5 stat points in attack, so not really worth it in my opinion to do that with Dragapult. What's another example of this? Maybe if you were running like one of the more recent Pokemon that came into the metagame was Spectrier. Maybe if you're running offensive Spectrier and you were going for 252 timid, you could make this optimization if you wanted, and you could go here, but again, you're going to be wasting 3 points you're going to be wasting 3 special attack points, which might actually come back and negatively affect some of your calculations. Whereas with Hydreigon, only changing 1 special attack point in favor of HP is not often going to come up. This is something you can also do, not necessarily with minimum speed Pokemon like Reuniclus, but you can actually do it with a Pokemon like Lapras. Lapras is a really popular Gigantamax Pokemon because its Gigantamax form changes its Ice move to G-Max Resonance, which sets up Aurora Veil, which is essentially both Light Screen and Reflect in one move, which is really powerful in doubles. Damage mitigation is really powerful. So you'll often see people, because Lapras is only 60 speed, you often won't see people maximize the speed because it's kind of a waste. You don't, like as we saw earlier, you don't even outspeed like minimally speed invested Rotom, and that's a base 85 Pokemon. So this is kind of a waste. What you would instead do is maybe, let's say you hit like, maybe you're aiming for 90 for some reason. Maybe you want to hit 90, and then you maximize your attack like we talked about. Well, here what you can actually do is you can optimize for, if you're going to run Life Orb, you can optimize for Life Orb like this, and then the remaining you can put into or you can even go one step further and hit 219, and then from here you can put, let's say you wanted to do like that, and then like that, for example. This would be like this is another good example of a Pokemon that, because you're not maximizing its speed stat, because it's kind of a waste at base 60, you're going to hit your 219 for your item Life Orb, and then you're going to put the rest into bulk. Now, if you're not running Life Orb, you don't have to hit this 219. You can hit whatever HP stat you want. You could go for something like this if you wanted, like let's say you decided, or you could even do our little trick that we talked about earlier, like this. This would be fine too. But if you're running Life Orb, I highly recommend that if you are able to optimize for it, it's going to benefit you in the long run, because of the extra chip that you're going to save, or the extra like optimization that you're going to get from that. Okay? So that's Life Orb. That's a component of HP. Now there's some other things you can optimize for, and I actually just helped one of my friends recently build their team in such a specific way for this. So I don't remember exactly what we teched for outside of this, but Pokemon like Ferrothorn is really interesting because Ferrothorn is one of the few Pokemon that can actually carry Leftovers in doubles. Leftovers is a really powerful item in singles, but it's less so popular in doubles because doubles battles are a lot shorter than singles. So Leftover says at the end of every turn, the holder restores 1/16 of its max HP. Okay? Now, the reason why this is bad in doubles is that it has to be on the battlefield for a certain number of turns to actually take advantage of the recovery that Leftovers provides. But Ferrothorn is bulky enough and uniquely typed enough to actually be one of the few Pokemon that can take advantage of it. So 1/16 of its max HP, you can actually optimize for this. If you don't sacrifice your calc, or if you don't sacrifice your any of your calculations too much, you can actually hit this HP stat to be optimal for Leftovers recovery. So what do I mean by this? Well, we said 1/16. So If we did 16 times 10, that's 160. So if Ferrothorn had 160 HP, Ferrothorn's going to be getting 10 HP recovered every turn. 176 is the next benchmark. Let's say we hit 176. Okay, 176 is the only other benchmark that Ferrothorn can hit, and this allows him 11 points of leftovers recovery at the end of every turn. So remember, Pokemon truncates. So if we did this stat, and we took our calculator, and we did 181 divided by 16, we're still only getting 11 points of HP recovery, which, unless it negatively affects some of your calculations, you could technically on Ferrothorn drop this to 176, and then from here distribute your remaining 296 between whatever you were looking to do with your bulk, right? Another Pokemon that this is for leftovers recovery now, specifically leftovers. Another Pokemon that does this is Rillaboom. Rillaboom is the grass starter, sees some competitive play because of its ability Grassy Surge, which sets up grassy terrain, which does the same thing as leftovers. It gives all Pokemon touching the ground recovery of 1/16 of their HP at the end of every turn. So if you take a look, if we put one value point in HP, that's already optimized for grassy terrain recovery. But if we're gonna run a bulky Rillaboom as like a pivot Pokemon that like a lot of people do, then you're gonna see a lot of people opt for more HP. So in theory, you could hit the next benchmark, which I don't actually know if I know it off the top of my head. 16 times 12 is 192. So if we EV'd up to 192, we get it's 132 HP. Can we hit the next one? 108? Can we hit 108? Or 208? No, we can't. Okay. So this would be the highest HP. This would be the best way to optimize for Rillaboom's grassy terrain recovery if you were looking to distribute others into other stats. If you want Rillaboom to be as bulky as possible, then by all means do this. But if you're looking to be this oftentimes comes up in I'm kind of explaining this in a bad way. Let me rephrase. I'm sorry. Let's say that I wanted to run an offensive Rillaboom. Let's build a Rillaboom spread right now. So Rillaboom is oftentimes run Adamant. Grassy terrain, a Grassy Surge, sets of grassy terrain, which allows Rillaboom to take advantage of one of the new moves from the Isle of Armor DLC, Grassy Glide. Grassy Glide is a 100 accuracy, 70 base power move that gets priority on grassy terrain. Priority is like, think quick attack. So it's essentially quick attack, speed, grass move that gets terrain boosted and gets stab boosted, right? Same type of attack bonus as well as terrain boosted. And most of the time people run Fake Out, and then from there you can run a variety of different moves that Rillaboom gets access to. Some people run Knockoff, some people run another grass move like Woodhammer, some people run let me think. Like U-turn can be a really good option to allows you to switch out after you deal damage to the target with this move. It can be a nice pivoting tool. Let's say we went with this set, and let's say we were I'm actually gonna hit two birds with one stone here. We're gonna say Assault Vest. Assault Vest is a really, really powerful item on a Pokemon like Rillaboom, who sets up its own sort of recovery, because Assault Vest says the holder's special defense is 1.5 times, but it can only select damaging moves. So you can't run Protect on this Pokemon, you can't run other non-damaging moves. So let's say we wanted to run Assault Vest and we had our 4 damaging moves here. Now when we go to the spreads, we can actually optimize for both. So remember, Assault Vest gives us 1.5 times boost. So you want your SPDEF stat to be an even number. Because if you take a look, let's do 90 times 1.5. You get a 135 SPDEF stat for the AV. Let's say instead it was 91. You only get a 1 point increase because of the truncation, which obviously works for the way you're doing the EVs. However, because you're Assault Vest, you want to be doubling that. So it'd be more beneficial for you to hit 92, because then you get 3. You essentially get, remember, 90 times 1.5 was 135, 92 times 1.5 is 138. So you invested EVs equal to 2 stat increases, but you got 3 instead because of the way Assault Vest works. So ideally, you would want your stat to end as an even number when you're running Assault Vest to best optimize for Assault Vest, right? So let's say we hit 100, or let's even go one higher and say 110, right? So now let's say we wanted to be maxed, or let's look for those jumps on Rillaboom and take a look here. Rillaboom is one of the few Pokemon that you actually might invest in all 5 of its stats, all 5 of its relevant stats. So let's take a look at the jump. So when does the jump happen for Rillaboom? Right there, 163 to 165. So it should happen again at 116. Yep, 174 to 176. And it should happen again at 196. So if we hit 196, yep. So we jump to 187, and then we're not going to hit another one because now 196 plus 80 is 256, or 276, which is too high. So 196 would be a decent place to stop for the jumps, right? So we've optimized Adamant Nature for the jumps. We've optimized Assault Vest because of we have it ending in an even number, and we're shoring up that weakness a little bit because it's pretty weak, especially defensive. So now we could use these remaining 156 to optimize for grassy terrain recovery. So remember, 192 is here's the first mark, 176. That's 16 times 11. That means that we get 11 HP recovery every turn with grassy terrain. But if we hit 196, we actually can't hit 196. So we could drop this down to like maybe 108. And we could get that 196, and then these remaining 2 points, we could do something like this, right? So now this is still optimized for Assault Vest because we end in an even number. So we get 108 times 1.5, which gives us 162. We optimize for our HP, which is 196. And this is grassy terrain. This means we're going to get 12 HP recovered every turn with grassy terrain. And then we optimized for our nature jumps from 185 to 187 at 196, and then the remaining 8 points we just spread out between these two other stats. And this would be an example of a fine Rillaboom spread. Now, other than being quote-unquote optimal for grassy terrain recovery, Assault Vest, and damage based on nature jumps, I don't actually know what this spread does. So what I mean by that is I don't know what this spread's going to survive. I don't know what it does. I don't know. I don't know what people like. This is going to survive a flamethrower from Charizard. Is this going to survive a U-turn from a Landorus? I don't know. But this is just an example of statistically a way you could optimize your spread for all these different things we've been talking about so far. Okay, so we've talked about Assault Vest. Spadef, you want it to end in an even number. We talked about Adamant or nature boosted stats getting the jumps, and we talked about grassy terrain recovery, leftovers recovery, and life orb chip. That's a lot of information, and there's a lot more, obviously. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do with EVs. I think I'm going to stop the video here because I don't want to overwhelm you all with this, but just to recap one more time, Life Orb deals 10% damage, 10% of your overall damage to your max. You lose 10% of your max HP, right? So it's best optimized for your HP stat to end in a 9 if you're going to run Life Orb. Now, like Cinderace we talked about, you can't always do that. So it's okay to have this and just not optimize for Life Orb. But on a Pokemon like Hydreigon, it can often be beneficial to just go ahead and take this 1 point in damage drop and optimize it for Life Orb chip, or in the case of a Pokemon like Lapras, you can hit your specific speed that you want. You can run your maximum attack, and then you can hit your 219, and then you can hit your other stat marks like this. And this is an example of a still very offensive Life Orb Lapras that hits a specific speed that you want it to hit and is optimized for Life Orb. Then we also talked about doing reducing your HP stat by 1 in favor of 2 additional points in your bulk, one in defense and one in SPDEF respectively, at exchange for 1 overall HP. This is just something that I personally do that I really like. In my mathematical brain, it makes sense. I'm sacrificing 1 HP stat for 1 defense and 1 special defense. I know a lot of people who don't do this, so you don't have to do it, but this is just something that I personally like to do. And then Rillaboom is a fantastic example of a Pokemon that we talked about that basically encompasses all 3 things in it. We hit the nature jump like we talked about, 196, gets us that extra point from 185 to 187, which again, I believe is caused by rounding, and it's caused by the fact that Pokemon truncates, so you get an additional point every so often. We optimized for grassy terrain recovery, which is the same as leftovers. 1/16 of your max HP comes back to your Pokemon at the end of the turn, which in this case for Rillaboom is going to be 12. And we also optimized for special defense with Assault Vest, because Assault Vest gives you a 1.5 times multiplier to your special defense stat if you use, but it only allows you to use damaging moves. So ideally you'd want this to end to be an even number, so you could get the maximum out of your Assault Vest. Now, I keep saying this incorrectly because my brain always associates that if I'm using Assault Vest, I can't put non-damaging items on my Pokemon. You still technically can. If you wanted to run Protect on this Pokemon, you could. However, when you go in to actually play the game, and your Pokemon's holding the Assault Vest, the game won't let you click Protect. It just won't let you do it. It's essentially a wasted move slot. So that's why I always say, like, Assault Vest gives you 1.5 times damage, or 1.5 times SPDEF boost, but you can only have non-damage, or you can only have offensive moves on your Pokemon, right? So I think that's everything I want to hit for now. I have a lot more to share, but we are getting close to doing the team building stream, which is going to be fantastic because, as most of you who have been following competitive Pokemon know, there's the Players Cup 3 qualifiers coming up here, I believe, middle of the 13th or the 15th, maybe. I'll have to check that. I know it's coming up sometime soon in July, or not July, wow, January. So I have some team building to do for that. We'll probably do that on a video and post it. But I'm going to be keeping all these things in mind. I have one more of these videos, I think, left to do in order to end this mini series and get us into some actual more team building stuff. But I also really enjoyed making that video with the Colossal team, so I will likely have more of those coming out very soon in the future. Just me playing with some different teams that I have built. I have a lot of teams that I like to. My friends will tell you I have an addiction to team building. I enjoy it way too much, and I often find myself in a situation where I need to actually practice using the team rather than just building it, because building it only goes so far. You actually have to test these things and put them into practice and give them a try. So, yeah. But thank you so much for watching. This is really fun for me to make these episodes. I hope you're learning stuff along the way. I hope I'm not boring you or talking too much about it. But the numbers behind Pokemon really intrigues me. I really enjoy it. In my opinion, it's part of the reason why Pokemon is such a diverse and deep game, and there's so many layers to it, because there's Pokemon like Rillaboom that can fulfill so many different roles for a team, whether it's offensive, whether it's defensive as a pivot, whether it's fast and Dynamaxing. There's so many different things you can do with a Pokemon just based on the EVs that you give it and the moves that you give it. So I love it. It's so much fun. I hope I'm starting to spark a little bit of interest in this with you all, and maybe you're learning something about the math behind the game, or behind the competitive side of things, and you can apply it to your own teams when you team build. But yeah, please leave a comment in the comment section if there's anything that you liked about this or didn't like about it, anything I can do to improve. I love getting constructive criticism. And like I said, one more video for this series, and we will be on our way into some gameplay as well as some other team building stuff. So thank you again for tuning in. I really appreciate it. You all are the best, and I look forward to seeing you in my next videos. Have a good one.